Welcome to this CNBC Africa special debate broadcast from the 6th EU-Africa Business Forum in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. I'm Esther Awuni. Now, this year's debate focuses on investing in job creation for the youth, where a high-level panel addressed some of the key issues and the business-enabling policies required to harness Africa's demographic dividend to drive inclusive transformation and create sustainable jobs. Some of the key speakers on the panel are Luca Lazzaroli, Director General of the European Investment Bank, Akinwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, and Stefano Manservisi, Director General of the International Cooperation and Development at the European Commission.
Mr. President, let me switch to English and ask you a question about creating jobs. I know the African Development Bank takes youth and women very, very seriously. And I know in your high five, these are actors that are extremely important to your plan for the bank. So my question to you, if you could share with us some of the action and strategies and plans that you have in further investing in youth for the continent, Mr. President.
I think the most important thing for me is when we think about youth employment or unemployment in Africa, we have to situate it within the broader macroeconomic perspective of the continent. There is no doubt that Africa is growing. There's no doubt about that. The issue is how inclusive is that growth process? And unfortunately, that growth process is not one that is able to create significant amount of jobs for the youth in Africa today. Just think about the numbers that we have to deal with. If you look at the number of unemployed youth today, 1/3 of Africa's youth, that's 420 million, 1/3 of them are vulnerably employed. Only 1/3 of them also have no jobs, and the rest of them are just roaming the streets. And so we have a major job crisis in Africa today. And so what we've got to really realize is that if we fix that particular problem, we will actually have a faster economic growth on the continent. Africa will grow by additional 10 to 20% in terms of its GDP if we are able to reduce the amount of unemployment that we have in Africa today. It makes, therefore, very strong economic sense. It is smart economics to invest in the youth today. Why do I say that? Because Africa's GDP will grow by an additional $500 billion a year if we just simply reduce the amount of unemployment of the youth that we have. And that's why the African Development Bank has launched a very major effort that is called Jobs for Africa's Youth. The goal of that Jobs for Africa's Youth is to help to create 25 million jobs in Africa over the next 10 years, and to help to impact 50 million youth at the same time. You see, I look all the time on CNN, I watch young people fleeing from Africa, going to Europe, stuck at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. I don't believe that the future of Africa's youth lies in Europe. I also do not believe that it lies at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. It lies in an Africa where there is inclusive growth, we are able to create a lot of jobs for them, and so on. That's why the African Development Bank is putting a lot of efforts into this. We help the youth to create jobs for themselves, because it's not just about creating jobs for them. And so we have to put a lot of emphasis, and we are doing that at the bank, on entrepreneurship, on skills development, and also building medium and small and medium-sized enterprises that form 90% of all the businesses you have in Africa. So the bank's effort is on skills development, building small and medium-sized enterprises, building entrepreneurship, and also providing access to finance for a lot of young people. And I think later on we can discuss what we are doing with the European Union Commission on a fantastic program that we just launched together called Boost Africa, which is about 145 million euros to actually support early stage businesses on that. So we're doing quite a lot, but not enough, and we all have to actually do more.
Thank you, Mr. President. Restons sur la perspective africaine. Je me tourne maintenant vers le commissaire des affaires économiques de la Commission de l'Union africaine pour voir aussi concrètement de votre côté qu'est-ce que la Commission fait pour pouvoir investir davantage et renforcer non seulement la jeunesse mais créer des emplois, qui est la perspective de la Commission.
D'accord, merci.
The average time the African youth spent in school
is 5 years on 10.3 years. Those figures are speaking for themselves. Now let's look at public spending towards the GDP. In the last 10 years, it goes from 1% in one particular country to a maximum of 12% in another one. Regarding professional training, the UNESCO reveals that despite an increase of students, only few governments are able to finance professional training at a satisfactory level. And 3 of 5 unemployed are young people in Africa.
Et sur l'information professionnelle, vous savez, je cite un document de bureau de l'UNESCO de Dakar, malgré une augmentation du nombre d'étudiants africains dans l'enseignement technique et formation professionnelle, seuls quelques gouvernements en Afrique sont en mesure de financer l'enseignement technique et formation professionnelle à un niveau qui peut soutenir une formation de qualité. Et 3 chômeurs sur 5 en Afrique subsaharienne.
3 unemployed out of 5 in Africa are youth who belong to informal economy. These are my first reaction. I'm just giving you the information as we can discuss. But let's put the base of our discussion at this objective.
Let me now, after I get the perspective of the African institution, now move on to the European institution to get the perspective on the matter. And I'm going to turn over to the Director General of the International Cooperation Development of the European Commission, Stefano Manservisi. Stefano, you've heard the African institution talk about the commitment that they have in building the youth and investing in the youth of Africa. What is the perspective of the Commission with regard to investing in the youth on the continent?
We all agree that we need to create in Africa substantial millions of jobs, sustainable, decent, more than decent actually, sustainable, as a part of, let's say, a growth in Africa, which is generating also jobs, which is not so evident because also in Europe there is growth, but this growth is not generating jobs. So we have, let's say, communalities. Therefore, first things, to be partner in sharing, analyzing, and identifying some, let's say, common solutions. It's not just a question of transfer of money. It's a question of designing together what are the relationship between the 2 neighbors, Europe and Africa. 2 neighbors which are largely asymmetric because, you know, growth in both, few job creation in both, demography which is on rise on one, which is Africa. And therefore, I think that we have the necessity to identify and to set up strategically at political and policy-making level what is the plan. Is manufacturing, is services, is, in any case, there is one point, adding value of whatever kind of economic activity which is creating jobs. Without adding value in common, I think it would be extremely difficult to tackle this challenge. Second point, it's not just a question of creating jobs for youth. It's a question of method. And there are 2 issues of method. One, discussion with the stakeholders, with the youth. This is not something which can be dropped by the sky. This is something which should be created on the basis of a permanent dialogue, which means also, let's say, a way to, let's say, organize the social dialogue in each country, in Africa in particular. Also here we can have some experiences to share. Second point is a question of business environment. There is a question of supply side reforms. It's an agenda of reforms, of deep reforms in the African system, in the African institution, in the African way of doing business. Now, third point, as the European Union, we are trying and being better partner on that. We are the first investor as Europeans. We are the first partners in import-export. We are the first partner in as a donor, as ODA, supply. All this is not enough, visibly. Therefore, we have to take all this together and change paradigm. Shifting from, let's say, sectorially doing well statistically, in being a partner which is using all this, import, export, and investment, meaning our companies, our entrepreneurs, And ODA and all the rest has a quantitative amount of money which can be used differently. Hence, our idea to have an external investment plan or external investment fund, which is addressing each of these issues that have been identified. First, the business environment. Second, the capacity environment. And third, the availability of means which are helping our business and the African business to do more in sometimes difficult situations. De-risking, basically, and helping in creating opportunity for the youth from the bottom, but with an environment which is conducive. Therefore, we are all shifting a paradigm. On our side, we don't want just to put another amount of money. We want to use the money we have together in a different way. This will require a pact. This will require mutual responsibility. No reforms, all this is useless. If we put just ODA, it is equally useless. We have to redefine together, and this is the purpose of this business forum, with the business, with the youth, with the institution, which is the most conducive environment in order to change the way of doing our common challenge in creating jobs. Therefore, an amount of money is there, a method is there, an experience is there, in order to de-risk, in order to think together, in order to reform also. The three elements are strictly linked.
Thank you for the perspective of the European Commission in shifting paradigm and staying on the perspective of another important European institution, the European Investment Bank. So I'm turning over to you, Luca Lazzarari, just to get your perspective.
I think it's fair to say that we take the same perspective that we take to sustainable growth. And in fact, we often associate youth employment, and sustainable growth as almost the key essential elements that we need to fight poverty. Now, you know, poverty is the key objective of the EIB. It is the SDG #1. It is written in the Cotonou, which is driving a number of other products that we lay out. So it is behind what we do. And when we mean job, we mean real job, real employment, of course. We don't mean underemployment. We don't mean unproductive employment, but we mean growth. This is the look we take. We tend to operate in various areas. The key areas are, you wouldn't be surprised to hear, is the private sector. We're active in the vital infrastructure, in climate action, and in regional integration. Now, these are four big areas. They clearly impact one in another. You cannot have growth, you cannot have employment if this is not environmentally sustainable. You cannot have growth if this is not a growth which is encompassing the whole economy, i.e. is inclusive. This is the look we take. So 2 words on what we do in particular. I mean, if you look at the numbers provided by the EIB, you'll see that more or less what we do is 50-50 between projects supporting the private sector and the public sector. Over the last 50 years, we supported some 1,300 projects in the continent. We lend some 2.5 billion euros a year. Now, half of it goes to the private sector. And we're trying to do more. What do we mean by private sector? We mean loans to corporates, loan to banks. Banks, because we do need banks to deploy that in the context of targeted facilities. Last year, we financed 10 such agreements with 10 banks. And some of it, and increasingly so over the last years, we see that that is going towards microfinance. Microfinance is something that we are increasingly conscious of the importance of, and we're developing. We're working with more than 100 microfinance institutions in the continent, and we work through debt as much as equity. So we've also engaged in equity in funds which are promoting the growth of very, very rural and limited players in these respective areas. It is something that we've learned to do over the last years. So you will see that we do more and more of that. In the same ways, we do more and more private equity in all sectors. Now, there's a number of important initiatives. Some of them have been mentioned. Some of them bring us together, different institutions you find today here. One is the EIP, one is Boost Africa, which indeed is an important project because it moves the bar further. It means that not just supporting private equity, but more into venture capital. So this is something in which we believe a lot. But next to that, and I do agree with what's been said earlier, we do need vital infrastructure. The two things go hand in hand, it's obvious. We know in some countries, 90% of the population is self-employed. These are populations which are essentially involved in services, transport, retail. If you want this part of the economy to develop, you do need to provide vital infrastructure. You do need to provide energy, communication, as much as you need to provide sewage, water, and so forth. And that's where the remaining 50% of what we do is going. I mean, so in a way, we're 50-50. We do want to do more in the private sector. Next to the initiatives which I mentioned earlier, I would like to mention just two, because I think they're equally very important. One is what we have launched almost 2 years ago and goes under the name of Resilience Initiative. This is targeting the Northern African countries. It has to do with supporting resilient growth. And it is something that we developed with specific focus on fighting the root causes of migration. One component addressing infrastructure, one component addressing private sector. And that's where we intend to deploy all the range of products I mentioned earlier, and which is already well underway. Next to that, the bank decided also to take a closer look at a number of very specific priorities which are developing in the continent, sub-Saharan part of the continent. We have launched a migration package, and we will be shortly be launching an infrastructure package covering these regions.
Thank you very much for the perspective of another equally important European institution. Now that we got the perspective of the African institution, the European institution, there are other players that are equally important. Now I'm going to turn over to the civil society, to my sister from Zimbabwe. First of all, congratulations for the peaceful transition in Zimbabwe. I can see that you are very busy on democracy, so this is something extremely relevant to what's happening to your country. So give us your perspective as a civil society player. You heard all these institutions extremely committed to supporting the young people and investing more. Is that good enough?
Thank you very much for this time and the opportunity, and also for your commitment to creating employment amongst the youth population. So I work to create opportunities between African entrepreneurs and European businesses who are looking to facilitate investment as well as collaboration and skills transfer. But as you mentioned, I also support the creation of a sustainable democracy that's led by the people and for the people in African countries. This weekend, and 19 other innovators and I participated in the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and the GIZ Youth Lab workshop that's also supported by Make IT and eSkills for Girls. Is it okay if the Youth Labbers stand up just so that you can see who they are and what they...
We got the Youth Lab in the room, so let's stand up. Big round of applause to the young people here.
Thank you so much. So this is a community of like-minded individuals who are trying to form a think tank that comes together to discuss the challenges and opportunities that we face in trying to create the future that we want to see in our respective homelands. There have been a series of consultative meetings across the continents, both in Europe and in Africa, that culminated in this weekend's events, to really develop a set of recommendations that will be presented later on following this panel as a way to inform and potentially guide you as you make your policies and approaches for how we can address this challenge facing our continents today. And many of the entrepreneurs that you'll see here today have extraordinary and inspired ideas about how they want to change their environments and their communities, but they also face significant challenges, and this is where we need your help if we're to succeed. And I think in our meetings and in our discussions, there's been a common understanding that although we've moved forward as European and African collaborators, much still needs to be done if Africa is to catch up and if Europe is to continue to grow. So for example, we have an entrepreneur named Pascal from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who's working to create a community of entrepreneurs in his region. And then we have an entrepreneur from Germany named Thomas, who's looking to connect entrepreneurs like Pascal so that they can share knowledge and skills and resources. But the current business and policy infrastructures are inadequate to facilitate this kind of interconnected learning across the regions. And so we're appealing to the policymakers and decision makers to create intentional structures for young entrepreneurs to be able to engage in the decision-making process around what policy should be in order to facilitate development and growth. How can we structure investment opportunities so that they are advantageous both to the local entrepreneurs but also to international investors? And so that's a conversation that we would like to be a part of and have significant ideas on how to shape and contribute to. Right. Another example is Abby from Ghana, who's working to develop software development skills amongst high school girls in her country. And yet she realizes that the limitations of our education system are inadequately equipped to prepare young students today for the future in which they're supposed to enter. Right. And so again, we need to constructively dialogue about how to change our training mechanisms, how to improve our education systems, so they are adequately equipping us with the technical competencies, but also with the creativity and innovation to build the future that we're looking to develop together. And finally, so I myself am working in Policy Dialogue Forum to try and bring African democracy and policy advocates together so that we can share best practices, but also dialogue on ways that we can strengthen our democracies collectively. However, challenges around access to internet, so the costs of access to internet, the hardware required to access the internet, in addition to things like internet security and challenges facing activists online, continue to prohibit the kind of impact that we're looking to achieve. Right. So I think maybe just to sum up, what I'm saying is that we need to work together. We need each other in this dialogue and this conversation. We need to make sure that the youth voices are represented at the decision-making tables of the institutions that you oversee. And we need to depoliticize the investment process and address things head-on like corruption and transparency to ensure that the youth are able to create the future that they would like to see. So it's not only job creation for youth, but it is job creation by the youth as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we say, the young people have spoken. So a big round of applause to the young people in the room there on my left. And last but not least, on va terminer avec la perspective du secteur privé. Et sur ce, c'est un plaisir pour moi de poser la question à notre ami qui nous vient donc, du groupe C-Vital, dont il est le PDG, Isaac Rebrab. Isaac, vous avez entendu les perspectives des banques de développement, de la Commission européenne, de la Commission africaine, de la société civile. Qu'est-ce que cela vous inspire en tant qu'acteur du secteur privé en termes de création d'emplois pour la jeunesse?
Donc le problème numéro un.
The number one challenge is first of all electrification in Africa to be able to build factories and generate employment. This is the first element. Secondly, do you know that to date, how much time it takes to ship a cargo from Europe to Central Africa, such as, I'm referring to countries like Chad or any other country? It is about a whole month and a half at minimum. Whereas, if we were having two railways that would go from the ports of Northern Africa between Europe and Northern Africa is 18 hours of sea shipment. We can reach Africa, the central part of Africa or Chad, in less than 48 hours. Today, we have some experience. We are exporting our commodities, our foodstuff and agricultural and appliances, for instance, to Cote d'Ivoire. The commodities are taking 45 days from Algeria to Abidjan. Whereas, if we had a railway that would go from Béchar, going through Adrar and continue all the way to Bamako, and being able to connect the railway, the existing railway that are already linking Cote d'Ivoire and Bamako and others that are coming from Senegal, Dakar, and linking Dakar to Bamako, we could conveniently deliver our goods in less than 48 hours. On the other hand, we are also interested in importing commodities from Cote d'Ivoire, made in Cote d'Ivoire, such as bananas, such as pineapples or mangoes. But if you have to go by sea. You cannot have fresh fruit, fresh commodities. This is simply to provide some illustration. Now, I was privileged to meet about 10 years ago the president of Mali, the erstwhile president of Mali, who told me at the time that Mali produce 500,000 tons per year of mangoes, and that Mali is only harnessing or export 450,000 tons of mangoes rotting under the trees, on the trees, because they were not finding any means, first of all, to export them. And I did make a promise to him. I said, listen, we are ready to invest to be able to mitigate, to have a mango pulp processing unit. And he said that would be great. You wouldn't fathom the incentive that you will have and the benefit that you will have providing jobs to all these women in Mali. And women do try to kickstart that project. Unfortunately, we didn't have electricity. So today, we need, by all means, to focus, first and foremost, on infrastructure. It is true that we must also have huge investment or massive investment in education. Otherwise, it is not that African entrepreneurs, that Africa does not have entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs, either Africans or Europeans, are willing and willfully committed to developing Africa. And I have something else to say. In terms of logistics, you know that 1 ton of production that is shipped from the northern part of the US toward the Gulf of Mexico pays about $20 to $25 per ton. The same product or commodity from Mali that is sold in Mato Grosso in the central part of Brazil, that will cost $75 per ton, but to ship it to samples is 3,500 kilometers by road. That will pay 155 francs dollars per ton. Today, for Africa, this is my perspective, this is my vision. We need to have 2 connections by railway that would go from the ports of northern Africa, from the Mediterranean. One that will cross toward the Horn of Africa, that would go from Hajinet Saoud and route Janet, linking Central Africa, linking Chad, and then go all the way to Central Africa and probably up to South Africa by going through Zambia, and another one that is already
in the Sahara, in Béchar, that was already built by the Algerian government, which can continue toward Adra, Bamako, and reach Cotonou, and also reach the major city of Lagos in Nigeria and went beyond, and another, which is another cross-border, which is currently being carried out because the Chinese built the railway from Djibouti all the way to Addis Ababa, and they are planning to continuing the railway toward the Atlantic Ocean to reach Cotonou or Lomé. It is imperative today, if we want to foster development in Africa, to ensure interconnections of all the networks, all the railway networks on the continent. And we need to ensure interconnection of all power grids in Africa. And as I talk about electricity, we are not just talking about renewable energy. In some regions, we'll have no other option than to go into renewable energy. But Africa enjoys hydraulic resources where we can have hydraulic plants. What is lacking today is the power grids, power lines, and I will give you an example. You know that there are 4 gigawatts of power plants in Congo that are shut down today, whereas Lagos is operating on power generators. So, if we can carry out investment in terms of ensuring the interconnection of the power grids in Africa, we will conveniently industrialize Africa, and not just that, and even agriculture. You know that 1 acre of land in Central Africa, 1 hectare of land, from 25 to 35, the same hectare is sold in Europe at 25,000, 35,000 euros per hectare. This is to give you an idea, and the difference is in infrastructure. One has the infrastructure, the other one doesn't have it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I will certainly come back to the President of the African Development Bank on the HIFA of the bank, because so many has been said about the HIFA. I'm sure we have answers to our friend here from CELTEL, but also some of the initiative you're taking with the European Investment Bank in boosting the SMEs. Last but not least, from the Tony Illumina Foundation, my good friend Pammy DeVille, you are promoting and boosting African SMEs across the continent. Talk to us about what exactly you're doing in boosting the young people.
So thank you very much. I'm really here impersonating Mr. Tony Illumina, so please imagine that he is the one who's speaking to you, because it is his story, it is his ambition, it is his aspiration, and it is his deep, deep commitment to the African continent that I am here to communicate. So I bring greetings from him and Tony Illumina Foundation. I have the honor and the privilege to be serving as the CEO of the foundation. In the last phase of my life, I've spent my entire career as a filmmaker and a film producer and a film financier in the UK. And in 2014, the universe conspired literally for me to meet with Mr. Illumina and for him to share his ambition for the African youth, and particularly through entrepreneurship. So I'm here really to say, what if we stop trying and thinking and talking about how we're going to empower the extraordinary talent, the human capital that Africa has, which the rest of the world is going to need. What happens if we actually stop talking and trying and start doing. And I'd like to share with you a story of a man who did precisely that. Tony Illumina, in 2010, set up the foundation. He's a businessman, he's an investor, he's an entrepreneur, and he is bringing and pioneering a different kind of philanthropy across Africa. In 2014, which is when we met, he said he was going to commit $100 million of his family wealth to support and empower 10,000 entrepreneurs across the 54 African countries. He's a Nigerian businessman who made it in Nigeria, but thinks Pan-Africa. And that commitment was to be made for 10 years, starting in 2015. His ambition is that in investing in African startups and entrepreneurs, that they will create jobs, because that's what entrepreneurs do. We create jobs. That they will generate revenues. That's what we as entrepreneurs do. We generate wealth for ourselves, for our communities, for our countries. And that was his ambition in 2014. On 1st of December, he launched that initiative, that 10-year-long program. And since we designed a program, because we believe entrepreneurship is teachable and learnable, and we've designed a program that equips entrepreneurs with lifelong tools, skills that they will need in order to go from one business to the next business, because entrepreneurs are not just one business owners, they're serial entrepreneurs. So we have developed a training program, a 12-week robust training program, which has been likened to a mini MBA. Added to that, we've also added mentoring. We have mentors from across the world and the African continent. Followed by the mentoring, we provide seed capital, $5,000. You'd be amazed to know how far $5,000 given into an entrepreneur with an amazing business idea, with training and with mentoring, what he or she is able to do. One of our entrepreneurs took that $5,000 in 2015, came back in 2016 to say that he was generating $1.2 million of revenues and creating 50 jobs through his business. Entrepreneurs need to be part of a network. They need to have peer-to-peer engagement. They learn and they do business with people they trust. So our entrepreneurs now become part of the largest network of African entrepreneurs. And then they are physically brought together. So just imagine a gathering like this, only it's a room full of 1,500 entrepreneurs from the African continents gathering in Lagos to build business relationships, to build cross-border trade, and that is precisely what we have done over the last 3 years. So over the 3 years, from the 200,000 applications that we've received from 54 African countries across 30+ sectors, agriculture is the largest sector. So nobody needs to tell young Africans that agribusinesses is cool and sexy, because they fundamentally believe that. And they are there from farm to fork in terms of the supply chain. Right. That is our largest sector in terms of the 30+ sectors. So 54 countries, 0 to 3-year-old businesses. So you can just have an idea, and you have to be 18 years old, or you can be 70+ or 100-year-old, and you can apply to the program, and you can be selected. Our youngest is 18 years old, and our oldest is 64-year-old entrepreneur, who obviously sees that there is still life beyond retirement. ICRC, there's a danger that entrepreneurship is becoming an urban elite conversation. And we need to remember there are entrepreneurs in the rural area. We need to remember the fragile economies across Africa. And we need to remember the post-conflict areas.
Thank you.
And I'm delighted that the foundation is partnering with ICRC with their $1 million commitment to take entrepreneurship to the post-conflict areas. And we're also finally in discussion with a major DFI who want to really take our program and target the Francophone countries, and within that, the fragile countries, to say we can bring the training, mentoring, and a program which is robust and has the proof of concept has been shown, and they will bring the seed capital and their own technical expertise to take entrepreneurship so we can actually begin to democratize entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. Always with a passion for entrepreneurship, and I encourage you to talk to her during the break. Let me now get a final intervention from the floor again before I get it to the audience. Then back to the President of the African Development Bank. You talked about some initiative that you're launching without a European institution in boosting African SMEs and youth. But more importantly, you've been reminded a couple of times the importance of energy, the high five of the bank. Maybe this is a time to just sort of wade in and what the bank is doing and those key issues that are important to doing business on the continent.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Let me say that it's really exciting to sit here and listen to you about how you have your youth innovation labs, and a lot of the young people that are here. It's very inspiring for me to see that the young people aren't looking for help. They're just really looking for the right kind of investment that allows them to take their ideas and turn them into viable businesses. And so if there's anything that I would like to say first, is that I think we have to change our mindset when it comes to dealing with issues of young people. A lot of times I hear people say, we need youth empowerment. But I don't know what it means. Because a lot of the people who get empowered are the people who say they are going to empower the youth. And so what I think young people actually need is really youth investment. You take a look at the amount of sovereign wealth funds we have today in Africa. It's roughly about $164 billion. We're taking down $164 billion, pension funds of over $334 billion. We're investing those in money market instruments outside of Africa and in negative real interest rate. And yet we have a continent where 66 million young people today, I'm talking about youth, I'm not talking about students, that absolutely are in poverty, living on less than $2 a day. That can't buy you a hamburger at all. And to get a sense of what that serious problem is, think of what that means in terms of the population. That is 8 times the size of Belgium. Of Switzerland. That's 6 times the size of Belgium. That's the same size as London, as the UK. The same size as France. 80% of Germany. Just think of those countries having everybody young, but very poor. I know I'm talking to a lot of my colleagues here from the European Union. When I first made the statement that I don't believe that the solution to the problem lies in Europe at all, I don't. Because when he was talking about the issue of energy, all the people you have in your lab that are trying to do a lot of IT, ICT business, because online outsourcing business is the fastest growing sector. It's going to employ 30 million people. But how do you function if you don't have access to power? So it's absolutely correct. And that's why the African Development Bank, we took as our first most important priority to light up and power Africa. You look at insects. Insects migrate. So what's the big deal about migration? Insects migrate from where it's dark to where there's light. So we're surprised that young people are living in our rural areas, that are living in Africa and migrating to Europe, period. There's no electricity here. 645 million of them, of Africans, don't have electricity. I've got my vice president for power here, and we at the African Development Bank believe that this is very important. That's why we are investing $12 billion in the energy sector over the next 5 years to help to leverage anything between $45 and $50 billion to solve the problem. Because power is like blood in your skin. If you have it, you have life. If you don't have it, you don't have life. No economy can develop in the dark. So that's a fundamental structural problem. So I want to agree with him as an entrepreneur that this is really very important. But the other thing I want to say, it's about agriculture. I was very happy that my friend Tony Elumelu, first, congratulations to what Tony is doing. I think he's doing a fantastic job. But I just want to say that I would like to see Tony actually get into agriculture as a business.
I'll take that back to him.
All right. The reason I say that is that the biggest sector to create jobs for us in Africa is the agricultural sector.
Absolutely.
You look at the size of it. We're spending today as a continent $35 billion importing food. If we do nothing, that's going to rise to $110 billion by 2030. That's food that we should be growing. That's rural areas that we should be creating a lot of jobs. A lot of our young people that we say are not employed are not in this room. They can't even get in here. Majority of them are stuck in rural areas, in zones of economic misery. And the only way we can create a new future for them is to turn agriculture into a business. Many of you know that that's my background in agriculture. I fully believe that the future millionaires and the billionaires of Africa are not going to come from oil and gas industry. They're going to come from the agriculture sector. When I was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, I got young people into agriculture for them to understand that agriculture is the coolest thing you ever found. But agriculture is sexy and it's very cool. I wore my bow ties all the time because I wanted them to change their mindset that agriculture is not that thing that you used to do. Look, the size of that sector, we've got young people listening to me today, the size of that industry, food and ag industry, by the year 2030, it's going to be $1 trillion. Think about it. So if you're thinking of where to make money, that is where to make money. It's in the agriculture sector. And that's why the bank will launch a major effort in this to change the labor composition of the agricultural sector. We launched our major effort that's called Enable Youth. Last year, we invested $800 million to develop a new cadre of young commercial farmers in Africa that are graduates. Look, the farmers of tomorrow are not likely going to be wearing overalls, you know. They're going to be holding applications in their hands, apps in their hands. They're going to be looking at tractorless tractors. And so I want young people to understand that this is the sector to be. We invested $800 million last year in 8 countries. This year we are going to go to another 7 countries. We expect to invest $1.5 billion every year for the next 10 years. Because if we don't, think about it, if we don't, in the next 20 years, Africa will have no farmers left because the average age of farmers is over 65. So understand that agriculture is cool and that agriculture is the fastest way to turn things around. One last point I just want to say about this is I believe in the potential of our young people. That was one of the young people when I was in Nigeria, a minister, whose name is Hawa Bello. I'm glad you gave $5,000, and I remember at the time she got a grant from me of 5 million naira. And she said, this is the first time government has ever touched me in my life. Fast forward that, by 18 months, Hawa Bello makes leather bags. Fast forward 18 months, she was invited by the London Fashion Show a week in London. She did extremely well. This year, she was invited to the New York Fashion Week, and they put her bags and herself next to Gucci. Now, this is the kind of things that we see all over, our young people doing a lot, and that's why I just want to say that at the African Development Bank, I buy your idea about young people having a voice. Actually, later today, I'm launching a presidential advisory group on the youth in Africa. That's all young people, just to advise the bank about how we can use our resources, take a risk on the youth. What are we using the money for? My biggest client as African Development Bank, my biggest client today is actually the young people. And so we got to change how we do that. If a young person walks into a bank and you're trying to borrow money from a bank, they look at you and they see nothing but risk. They can't see potential, they can't see opportunity, they see risk. And that's why I agree with my colleague from the European Investment Bank that the best way we can do this is to have a facility that allows us to de-risk the financial markets to lend to young people. When somebody looked at Bill Gates, when he developed his applications, IBM looked at him at the time and said, forget it. there's no future for a laptop. How wrong could they be? And so I think that we must change as institutions. Let's develop the right kind of financing facilities so that when a young person walks into a bank and they are 21 years old or 24 years old, we don't have to ask them to go and bring tax receipts for the last 40 years. I think this is very, very important. I can assure you that at the African Development Bank, we're changing how we work. We're becoming a lot more youth-centric because that is actually the demographic that we have. And actually, as president of that bank, I today don't feel totally comfortable at all that I have 66 million young people that are in poverty. And that's going to change. You can take it from us.
We're going to do something extremely challenging. We're going to ask each of the panelists in 30 seconds just to give me the takeaway message you want to actually get to the audience who've got discussion we've been having, starting with my sister from the end there, Motsi-Khata, in 30 seconds. What's the message?
Thank you. So two things. First, I think agriculture is important, but we must also marry that with technology. There's a digital revolution that's on the continent, and if we don't capacitate the young people to be a part of that, we're going to miss it, and that will be to our disadvantage. And secondly, I commend the AFDB for creating structures that allow young people to be part of the decision-making process. But I would also say there are existing channels, and we need to make these more transparent and open, so young people can use those channels and advocate for themselves as well, and especially young women. Thank you.
Thank you. In 30 seconds, I like that. Let's move on to Luca Lazari. In 30 seconds, what will be the message or key takeaway from the session?
I would say if you focus on youth employment, it's not a new thing, but it is important. It's not just the demographics, which are very compelling, but we have to put that in relation to a number of other changes, such as digitalization, among the others, which was mentioned earlier. We live in a new economy. There's a big challenge and opportunity for this continent, which is laying ahead. The other thing which I think is also important, which I take and I retain particularly as representative of institutions such as EIB, is the importance of developing the private sector together with enabling infrastructure. I would totally agree with what was said earlier. If there's no electricity, there's no digitalization. There's no digitalization, the chances to make a leapfrog for the whole continent and acquire and develop in a much closer way to what we all ventilated as being the future, that will never happen.
Thank you. Now let me move on. Victor Harrison, en 30 secondes, quel est le message de notre commission?
To prompt us to think that even at the primary level, we are not yet being able to satisfy the minimum criteria for Millennium Development Goals, or even SDGs, 47%. And the development requires human resources that are credentialed. And until we get to educating our youth, we will get nowhere. That is as simple as that. So let us endeavor to at least provide education. I provided 32 million. What are we going to do of these 32 million out of the 1 billion, 0.2 of illiterate or uneducated? I'm happy that the minister mentioned education. It is quite critical. At the secondary level, that is where we talk of entrepreneurship. Not everyone will go to the university. We can't deceive ourselves. Let us not deceive ourselves. Not everyone will reach university. But what we aspire to, of course, then collaboration between the private and the educational system. What does the private sector want? It has to be very clear, and from there, the educational sector will tailor the future employees. In terms of ease of doing business or business environment, there are strategies for the digital economy within African Union. I want to buttress this entrepreneurship. It was decided a decade for entrepreneurship at the level of the African Union. In terms of ease of doing business, I would like to take ownership of what has been said and said we are elaborating Pan-African investment codes. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we're putting in place financial institutions to support what the chairman of AFDB said. We are planning to create an African investment fund or bank. So this is what we have in the pipeline. I think I used up the 30 seconds.
Let me now move on to the President of the African Development Bank. Mr. President, what will be your final message or takeaway from this discussion?
My final message is that, we shouldn't be too discouraged. I think we should have confidence in the youth that they can do great things with their lives. And what we should do is to make sure we have the resources to support them. I also want to say that the future, actually, as we create jobs, we should not look at training people for the jobs of yesterday. We should train people for the jobs of the future. The future is going to be a digital world with fourth industrial revolution, with digital technology, with robotics and all of that. That's the future. And so therefore, we must certainly increase the share of our training that is going into science, technology, education, and mathematics. And the African Development Bank, we're funding the Africa Virtual University, we're funding the Gaudi Institute of Technology, producing the next generation of computer programmers and so on for Africa. As we're speaking, we are doing something with Microsoft and Facebook to actually do what we call, programmers, just basically computing to create jobs. And so this is to have coding academies that will be able to train about 50,000 young people and connected to both Google and Apple. And just to end, I like a song that John Lennon actually sang, which is say that if you're out there, if you're out there, if you're a man or a woman, and you're listening to us, just understand that for us, the young people, the future we are all talking about today was yesterday, and we're already late. So let's get on to it and do a lot for them. Thank you.
Moving on, getting the perspective and the final word of the European Commission, Stefano Mazervesi. What will be the final word in your message?
Well, I take up my take, but then also replying to the question. I mean, first, obviously infrastructure, obviously electricity. By the way, we are, as European Commission, investing already billions in electricity, in particular through the array plan of action, which has been adopted in the framework of the COP21 by Africans. Therefore, we have concrete things to do. Certainly, we need billions of investment. But I would like simply to caution about a sort of new quantitative approach. I think that, first, this is an issue which is much more common. It's not just government to government, institution to institution. It's primarily people to people. And I think that what our colleague with the civil society said, and what the business are telling us, let us do in the business and let's create the condition in which this can be done in a transparent way, in a way where the administration is friendly, where taxation is transparent, where predictability, including on the rule of law, is there. I think therefore, let's not just turn everything into quantity. There's a lot of things which must be doing together in terms of reform, which is Africans should do. Well, we are partners, but Africans should do. Second point, the real test is the added value chain. This could be in agriculture, this could be manufacturing, it could be wherever. I deeply agree with the fact that agriculture is certainly on the forefront. I totally agree.
That's all we have from the high-level panel of the 6th EU Africa Business Forum in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. Thanks for watching and have a great day.